you need motivation, yeah, to get through the day, just tune in, cause we'll make a way. Positivity. So if you need environment to make a change, yeah, start with today, and tune into Pancake Monday. Pancake Monday with Pastor OGS. OGS. Oh yes. Oh yes. Pancake Monday. Pancake Monday with Pastor OGS. OGS. Oh yes.
Ladies and gentlemen, brothers and sisters, welcome to a very, very special edition of Man Cave Monday. I'm so thankful for this opportunity to be here with you once again. And as always, I thank you for your support. This is season 2, and we have set a very high bar so far in this season. First episode, we had the very prestigious president of my alma mater, Morris Brown College, Dr. Kevin James, was on. And then we had my friend and my frat brother, Joe, came on, and he talked. Joe Freeman came on and talked about education and all that he's doing in that space. And then last Monday, we had the funk doctor himself, Mr. George Clinton, to come and share. But this week we are fortunate and we are blessed. I've got 2 guests because it's just that big of a deal. I've got my own father and uncle sharing with me. Y'all have heard from them in season 1 of Man Cave Monday, but they are here for a very special reason. Many of you may know this is my 15th pastoral anniversary this past weekend. And so I thought it would be great for you all to hear from my mentors, the men who have helped to shape and mold me all of my life, but certainly throughout my preaching and pastoring ministry. He is the pastor of the Shiloh Missionary Baptist Church in the great city of Albany, Georgia. He is my father, Dr. Perry Simmons, and he is the very efficient pastor of the Mount Zion Baptist Church in Albany, Georgia. He is Dr. Daniel Simmons. Gentlemen, how y'all doing tonight?
Well, sir.
Thank y'all for agreeing to do this. I am well, and I'm just excited that y'all are here with me. Y'all have been individual guests, and that's been my highest rated shows so far. So I'm excited to have y'all back in this space again.
Happy to be with you.
You're happy to be with you, and happy 15th anniversary.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Absolutely. To those of you who are still coming in right now, go ahead and share this page with someone. Share this interview. I promise you're going to get something out of it. And if you haven't done so already, go to our YouTube page, and I'll put that link in the chat as well so that you all can follow us there. We're still building it. Last time I checked, I had 10 whole subscribers to my YouTube page. So I'm thankful for you 10, and maybe we can add 10 more by the end of the night. But let's go ahead and jump right in to this space. As you know, I'm celebrating 15 years of pastoring, and so I thought it would be good to come and talk about some lessons in leadership. I have watched you both all my life as leaders, and more importantly, as men. And so I thought it would be good for us to come on, and what I want to do is share some lessons that I've learned, and then, if y'all can expound on that. It's probably 4 or 5 things that I'll share tonight. And thank y'all again for watching, and thank y'all for supporting. I was 26 years old when the Lord called me to Jacob Chapel. 19 when I was called to preach, 26 when I started pastoring the church. And looking back on it now, there are things, of course, that I would do differently, the way I approach certain things. But at that age, you don't know what you don't know. And I think that's been one of the most critical lessons that I've taken from the whole experience. You don't know what you don't know. So, Daddy, if you could talk to us about your earlier experience. I can admit now that I didn't know a lot of things, but to be frank, I didn't know what I didn't know. What was your early experience like in leadership?
Well, first of all, you have to understand that some wisdom comes with age. If you knew then what you know now, you probably would have been beside yourself.
Mm.
You know, sometimes we, as grandma used to say, we're too big for our britches.
Yeah.
And so I think that in due time, you know, God got you ready for what it was that He wanted you to do. You've been at Jacob Chapel 15 years. How old is Jacob Chapel?
Jacob Chapel is 80 years old.
So that's just think about that. 65 years, someone else was in leadership, and but 65 or 80 years ago, God had a plan for your life. Just and part of that plan was that you would be at Jacob Chapel. So that means that somebody who was in leadership had to lose that position of leadership in order for God to put you there.
Mm.
And what we have to understand is that when we are called to leadership, and this is what I learned as a young pastor, when you're called to leadership, there was leadership before you got there.
Mm.
And so it's just like in the book of Samuel, when the Bible said that Samuel came no more to see Saul until his death, because God had already, told Samuel, I want you to go to Jesse's house. I've got somebody else. In other words, I've taken the anointing from Saul to give it, to David or to someone else. And so in order to elevate you, God had to either promote someone else or, move someone else. Same thing with me in my earlier years. And when I started pastoring, there was so much I didn't know. And I learned on the job. But I also had a preacher. And I had my father, I had my grandfather, but there was another preacher, Reverend Winford Hope, who was my mother's pastor at Mount Calvary Baptist Church, and the retired pastor of the Ebenezer Baptist Church in Athens. He was there to give me some direction, when I went to my first pastorate. And the information that he shared with me, and also the late Reverend Henry Flowers. He shared some information with me that really, helped me in those earlier moments. So it's good to have somebody that can mentor you, take you to spaces and share with you in spaces where you have not been before.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. What you think about that?
Yeah, my experience was different from yours in that you were 19, you were called to preach when you were 26. I started preaching in June. In September, I was called to pastor.
Wow.
So in 5 months, I was pastoring. And so thankfully, I went in with a complete sense of inadequacy. I didn't know what I knew, and I didn't know what I didn't know. And so thankfully, I just had a sense of helplessness. And in turn, that helped me, because then I started relying on other people. And so I was literally every weekend calling your daddy, my daddy, some of my pastor. Hey, I got conference this week. I've never held a conference. I was never a deacon. I've never been in a deacon's meeting. They want me to come to the deacon. And so I knew nothing. And then thankfully God put me in a church where I had a deacon also who trained me, and named Alan Troutman. And I'm talking about things I didn't know. He would sit down to tell me, even in preaching. Again, it was 6 months, and I was flunking trying to close. and he said, let me talk to you after church. He said, this is what your problem is. He says, I've studied you, and because of the range of your voice, you are starting so high and getting so high in the sermon. When you get ready to close, you ain't got nowhere to go. He said, slow down, start low. And he said, just listen to me. And so during my preaching, he would be talking. Bring it down. Take your time. Take it down. And then when it was time to go, he said, now, close it. You know, but just that inadequacy. And I think if any preacher, regardless if it's 6 months or 6 years, if you go into it and stay into it with a spirit of inadequacy, it'll keep you in a teachable place.
So being humble, being teachable is an important characteristic, if I'm hearing you correctly, and
Absolutely.
being able to admit that you don't know.
Yes, sir.
I think for me, like I said, starting out, when I, of course, y'all know my first sermon I did at Abyssinia. So, second Sunday in August, 1999, 19 years old. I was 20, but I was 19 when the Lord called me. But anyway, did my first sermon. And of course, it's a packed house. This is home, right? And after that day, I go back to Atlanta because I'm in school. I'm at Antioch under Dr. Alexander. And the next time I preached was in a Tuesday afternoon chapel service where only the recovering addict ministry came. So literally you had 5 of them and they were dozing off. And that was humbling for me because I'm thinking, I'm preaching, I done got my license and brought it back. And it was humbling. And I needed that because anywhere that you're going to go, it can't be about the crowd. It can't be chasing the crowd or the clout, from the cloud. So y'all know the crash course that I went through at Antioch as a young preacher. And I think that was necessary. And then having both of you all as checks and balances for me along the way. So you want to interject something?
Yeah, when I served communion for the first time, it was as a pastor. When I baptized at the first time, it was as a pastor. When I first did the call to worship, it was as a pastor. Because the rule in those days was there wasn't very much you could do and not be ordained but preach. And you couldn't be ordained unless you were called to pastor a church.
Right.
So when, a lot of things I did for the first time as a pastor. And let me share this with you. I got called to my first church in 1973. In that same year, my daddy had a heart attack. And he asked the preachers where he was engaged to do revival if they would accept me in his place. The first year I did revival, I did 35 of them.
Good.
5 nights a week.
I remember them 5-night revivals. Well, I'm so glad we don't do them no more.
Revival after about the 10th.
Yeah.
But it was all OJT.
Wow. And see, I was fortunate in between Antioch and Jacob Chapel. I did a year at Bethel Baptist. That's how I got to Tallahassee under Dr. R.B. Holmes. And believe it or not, that was the first time I had served communion and baptized and what have you, because he allowed me those opportunities. At Antioch, I was more of a musician. I was a minister, but Tuesday noonday was my time to preach, but rarely on a Sunday. I can count on one hand how many times I preached on a Sunday, and rarely on a Wednesday night, because there were so many of us preachers there at one time. So when I get to Bethel, I was allowed to do a lot more preaching. I got, like I say, baptized and served communion as well. So I had somewhat of an internship, I guess you could say, with Bethel. And that gave me a chance to cut my teeth even more. So I get to Jacob Chapel, and it's a family church. Tallahassee is one of those kind of towns similar to Albany. Everybody knows everybody. And so I'm the 9th pastor. I'm 26 years old. And almost immediately, things start to grow. I was not installed until a year after I got there because of the way the organization we were a part of at the time, the Free Will Baptist, they did not install you until you've been there a year. So after that year, we had an installation / anniversary. Unc did the banquet that year, and Daddy preached that Sunday morning. And so the paper had written, the local paper, Tallahassee Democrat, had written an article. It says he's a godsend. And they talked about, 400 or 500 folk joined in the first year and all this stuff, all this excitement. And so we grew very fast. And I say all that because I could not catch up to the growth, that was happening. So a lot of things we just kind of did on the fly. We were growing, expanding, and so I didn't take the time to build infrastructure because things were growing so fast. But I learned on the job and had good supportive folk, that were helpful to me. But what was it like for you all in those beginning years, let's say, especially because you are so young? You got members who are old enough to be your parents or your grandparents. But you got to show, and this is really what I was getting into. At that stage, I can remember having something to prove. That was my posture. That was my demeanor as a young man. I'm going to show you that I know what I'm talking about. I'm going to show you that I know what I'm doing. And I wore that on my shoulder a lot of times. Now, granted, you had some folk that probably pushed my buttons in that regard, just telling me how young I was. But here again, I had that chip on my shoulder as a young man. I got something to prove. So a lot of it was ambition. You become competitors with your neighbors, and there's jealousy and there's competition amongst preachers even. So for a lot of years, I wore that on my shoulder, to be honest, that I got to prove that I belong here and that I know what I'm doing. And anything on that?
I'll let Dr. Simmons speak first on that because I've got something I want to say about it.
Yeah.
Something.
Yeah, I think that what you would discover is most preachers share that in common. We all have these failures along our journey, and that is one of them. We are the quote unquote the spokesperson for God, and we are pastoring people. One older, some think they smarter, they got more education, blah blah blah, and so and they're looking at you like you don't know what you're doing, and because of age, they're calling you that boy, and we all get that. And so there is that part of us that want to prove, okay, I know what you're doing. I had people I was pastoring who were my professors at Albany State, who intimidated me in the classroom. And now I am pastoring them feeling like, how can I tell him anything? And so, but again, even in me, there was this part of me that wanted to legitimize myself as a leader and a pastor. And obviously, that became about me, so it ended in failure. I did a lot of things, said a lot of things, shouldn't have done, made some leadership mistakes because I was making it about me. And we all learned from that.
Yes.
And then the other part is this. There were people in town, including ministers, who were very upset that I got called at Mount Zion. And my understanding is there were wagers about how long I would last. And I'll just tell you this, at my first church, they were shocked. They said the way I got it, I stood in the pulpit and had a tape recorder and played your daddy. But
wow.
But one of my deacons and some other people start telling me, they say you won't last a year. They say this. So now I'm trying to prove to the community that I'm going to stay here. And this is a story that is 100% true. So one day, a gentleman comes in and hands me a Coca-Cola, a bottle of Coca-Cola. And I said, Deke, what is this for? He said, I made a bet with somebody. I bet somebody Coca-Cola that one, nobody would shout in Mount Zion. And two, if they shouted, you'll be gone. But suddenly the woman shouted and you're still here.
Wow. Wow.
Yeah.
True story.
Yes, sir. But, and so, yeah, we've all been there.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think what we learned the hard way is that where we were, we did not put ourselves. We were only there because that was God's will for us to be there. And the only way we can admit that we don't know and that we need help is when we ask for help. That's the first indication that you can't, is that you will ask somebody to help you. And so since God knew us and knew our weaknesses and our strengths, he put people in our path. He put Dr. Heath in Daniel's path. And he was of great service to him. He treated Daniel like a son. I'm telling you, one of the best things that can happen to you as a new pastor or preacher is to have somebody treat you like a son.
Absolutely.
And Daniel had that. And you don't know it, but God gave you the toughest daddy there was, Cameron Alexander. They don't come no tough.
Yeah.
You make it under him and you can go under anybody.
Yeah.
And then he sent you to Dr. Holmes. And all he was doing was positioning you. Because had you not gone to Tallahassee, Jacob Chapel never would have known about you. God was in that. And so as you became pastor, of Jacob Chapel and tried to convince folk that you knew everything, folk knew you didn't know nothing. That's why they were patient with you.
Yeah.
That's why they were tolerant.
Yeah.
And that's why they were praying for you. You remember those old ladies just praying and mourning? I had some old ladies when they used to follow me around when I preached. And in the middle of my sermon, they stand up and start praying, Lord, help my child.
That's real.
Miss Addie DeYoung, Miss Murs, Aunt Butter, Miss Dulce Robinson, they prayed for me. And you are where you are today because some of those folk who you thought you had convinced that you know everything, they were praying for you.
And I think there's a lot to that. I absolutely agree. Because I look back and think back now to some of those sermons, really from the first 10 years, as far as I'm concerned. I got better over the years, but I was like a machine gun. And anybody that I felt like had a problem with me, them first couple of years, man, I'm just at them, and I settled a lot of my arguments from the pulpit, which we were trained not to do, but I did.
Right. That's a great mistake.
Yeah, we trained not to do it, but I did it. I knew that there were certain folk out there that didn't care for me or that were undermining me. And we were growing and I'm like, what are you arguing about? We got success. What else you want? But I asked the Lord even now to forgive me for some of the things that I said and some of the mistakes that I made in leadership, because I realized that I should have been more mature than that. But then again, you don't know what you don't know. But I should have handled those situations better. You don't use, and this is for anybody else that's watching right now, young preachers, young pastors that are watching, don't use God's platform to settle your own scores or to start wars. You are shepherd. You are under shepherd. And those are his sheep. And Reverend used to tell us all the time, he's like, these ain't your folk. These are God's folk. And you don't whoop them. You don't correct them. He would always tell us that as sons because we were preaching in his pulpit. But even as pastors, they don't belong to us. And if I had anything to do over again, if I could, I would be a lot more compassionate as a pastor and patient as a pastor, and not use that platform. Not to say that we don't correct, not to say that we don't teach, but there's a way to do it. And now, even after 21 years of preaching, I'm still learning how to do that. As y'all were talking, I wrote down just the word pastor, because both of you are such good pastors, lovers of people, caretakers of souls. Like you just rattled off names a minute ago, just of folk, that helped and prayed for you and mentored you, whatever. But y'all know so many people within your congregations. You know their families, you know their backgrounds. You take the time to be there for their most significant life events and hurts and successes and graduations and funerals and all the above. You all are so unique in that you have both pastored what some would consider mega ministries, but yet, and I said this in y'all's individual interviews, y'all still so Cairo about it. No matter how high you've gone, no matter how many thousands of members y'all have had, folks still can approach you. Y'all are still down home. Oh, that's sister such and such, or that's brother such and such. And they feel, y'all are just such great pastors. And I always admired that about y'all. What do you say about that dynamic? Is that something you do on purpose? Is that something you have to tell yourself to do? How is that?
That has to be done with intentionality. As you grow in the pastorate, you have to make a decision about what you are going to make your priorities. And for me, and I got it from my daddy, from your daddy, and my mama, the people will always be the priority. And what I will tell you is, as a part of who I am, I've always sought out mentoring, guidance. And so as I started talking to pastors who had larger congregations, where I was going, one of the things I was told consistently, there's some things you're going to have to give up. When you get certain number, you can't visit people. You can't do the funerals. You can't do the weddings. You can't do this and that. You have to delegate that. You're going to be too busy. I rejected that advice. I can count on one hand the funerals of members of Mount Zion in 30 years that I've not preached. The weddings, unless it was their choice to get somebody, the weddings, the hospital visits, I do them like I did the 35 members I had at my first church. Yeah. The interaction, so for example, when members join Mount Zion, we take a photo and then there's this digital database. So I spend time studying those photos. So if I see that member in the store or somewhere and I say, hey, and I call them, how you know me? Because it's intentional. And if something happens, except to study that family, to know. And I'll give you an example of, people become committed to the ministry when they know how committed you are to understanding them, to knowing them, and loving on them. And I was going to share something, but I don't want to just monopolize time. But once people see your commitment to them, then they are inclined to be more committed to the ministry and just make the pastoring even better. And believe it or not, in our culture, people still expect the pastor to be the shepherd. And the shepherd is the shepherd because he lives among the sheep. He smells like them. They know his voice, and he knows their voice.
Yeah.
And you are a shepherd because the Lord trusts you with his sheep.
Yeah.
Keep in mind they're his sheep, and he has trusted you with them. And as a matter of fact, he has made you overseer. And with that position goes a responsibility. That means you're responsible for the sheep. And so you're responsible for them eating and drinking. You're responsible for their safety. And so, as Daniel said, you got to spend time with them. As pastor, I just felt like it was my responsibility to shepherd the people. And at Abyssinia, even though there were thousands, I knew them all by name. I knew their mamas, their grandmamas, their brothers and their sisters. I married them, I buried them, I counseled with them, I went to jail, I went to court with them, I got them out of jail. I did everything that there was to do because that was my responsibility. Because there are two words that go together with leader. One is humility and the other one is servant. In order to be great as a leader, you've got to be a servant. Who do you serve? The people. Who are the people? The sheep of God. Yeah. They belong to him, but we are held responsible for them. And so as a young pastor, and you're still young, you can still preach an hour when it don't bother you. 20 minutes out of me and I'm ready to sit down. But
well, that's all them 5-night revivals you were doing.
Yeah, you're a young preacher. And this is a good time for you to start, investing time in your people. If you are tired, be tired from being the shepherd. Okay? Be tired from preaching. Be tired from teaching.
Yeah.
Don't be tired of preaching. And don't get tired of the sheep.
Yeah.
Okay? And because you have a great responsibility to take care of them.
So you both bring up what I'm calling the human element at this point. And again, y'all, this is Man Cave Monday. I'm talking to my father and my uncle, great mentors in my life. I've been pastor 15 years, and my survival is credited to these men right here on this screen with me. Make sure you hit the share and feel free to comment as we go. You're mentioning, in the way I'm phrasing it, the human element. There's always this great argument about who's the greatest, Michael Jordan or LeBron James. Now, of course, they don't mention Kareem because they ain't old enough to remember. Some would still argue he's the greatest, right? But anyway, in the context of Michael and LeBron, I credit LeBron over Michael in this one area, and that is the fact that ever since this young man was 13 years old, he was in the spotlight. His middle school and high school games were broadcast on ESPN, which means he grew up literally in the public eye. Whatever growth, whatever development he was going to do, it was going to happen in front of the whole world. He's on the cover of Sports Illustrated, Slam Magazine, ESPN Magazine. They're doing documentaries on him. He's a teenager. And to his credit, in the 18 years he's been in the league and all the years before that, since he was 13 to 14, he has not had any major breakdowns, any major gaffes or what have you. But Michael didn't grow up with that kind of spotlight because the media wasn't what it was. LeBron emerged at the birth and the growth of social media. He comes in the league and all of a sudden there's Facebook, there's Twitter, there's 24-hour news coverage. And so I say all that to say in the human element, for me, I feel like one of them child stars, right? I literally grew up in the public eye, meaning whatever growth, whatever development, whatever mistakes I was going to make, I was highly scrutinized because I grew up or had to lead in a space where everything is public, everything is talked about. And so the room to grow is what I'm getting at here. The space that we as leaders need to grow and to be human. And I'm not talking about living ratchet, ridiculous lives, because we're going to talk about integrity in a few minutes. But just that any young minister, any young leader now that's coming along, for them to have to develop with so many eyes and social media being what it is, and almost like you have to perform and always be on lights, camera, action, and never get to grow and make your mistakes and bump your head and skin your knee like everybody else does because of your position. What do you think about that?
Okay.
Oh, so go ahead, Dad.
No, go ahead, Dan.
No, you can go ahead.
All that you just said was just pressure y'all put on yourselves.
Yeah.
See, that's self-pressure. Your first call is the preparation, to prepare yourself,
Okay.
to get prepared, to do what it is that the Lord would have you to do. Now you heard about Jesus when he was born. The next thing you heard, he was 12 years old. Next time you heard from him, he was 30 years old.
Mm-hmm.
So somewhere in that time, he was growing, he was maturing, because the Bible often refers to him in Nazareth where he grew up, where he matured. And you had some of that time to mature. It's just that you were so busy doing your own thing. And you didn't use that time, to prepare for what it is you were doing. So what God had to do with you was he went on and called you and then started slapping you around. He called you and then he started, putting, you in positions to have to learn something.
Yeah.
But three things. Number one, good leaders have good advisors around them. You had advisors, and sometimes you didn't take advantage of those advisors. You do now, because you bother me all the time.
I bother Aunt too.
And some other folk too. A good leader serves with love. That's why you don't mind being tired from serving the people, because you love them. And then good leaders have the will to serve. Let me tell you, that will is what makes you go when you don't feel like going, doing when you don't feel like doing. It makes you preach when you don't feel like preaching.
Yeah.
It's the will, to do it. And so as a leader, you gotta have one skill, and you said we're gonna talk about that later, but that's the skill of integrity. Integrity when it comes to your job. Mm-hmm. Integrity when it comes to sermon preparation.
Yeah.
Because I can tell when a preacher has prepared himself in a sermon. Now, Dr. Simmons will tell you, when he preached this initial sermon, I was probably the most quiet person in the audience. I sat there, I listened. What I wanted to hear was evidence of a call on his life, because if I didn't hear it and see it, I was going to tell him right then, you're not going no further than right here. I didn't care what Reverend he said. I had to hear that, and I had to see that, and I had heard and seen enough preaching that I knew what preaching was. I knew what the anointing was. And up there, he didn't skin the cat. He didn't raise his leg, and do those things and bang on the pulpit. But that boy was thorough. That boy was theologically sound, hermeneutically sound, and homiletically arranged. I mean, he just had it.
Yeah.
And I saw that. And so that showed that he was preparing himself for it. He's a better preacher now than he ever been. I listened to him. But some preparation went into that. First of all, salvation, sanctification, and revelation. You heard it today.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Reverend.
Yeah. What I would say to you is you have to resist the temptation, the pull of the world to be what I call a celebrity. You have a calling to an audience of one. You don't have to create and perpetuate an image on social media based on people's expectations. And even the expectations that they put on your life, just don't feed into it. And it's a tough decision to make, especially for somebody that's as young as you or younger, because that's where everybody is. They're there and they're creating these fake images. And just resist all of that. You don't have to be that. And like in one thing you mentioned about LeBron James, and LeBron James is not out there like that. You don't know where he's eating. You don't know what he just bought.
Right.
He's not taking you through tours of his house, his bathroom, his kitchen. Mm-hmm. He keeps his life private.
Yeah.
And we've got to do the same and not let people make us celebrities.
Agreed.
Yeah. An audience of one is all you need to be concerned about, and that's God.
I agree, and I'm thankful for that kind of feedback. because I've learned that and still am learning that over the years. And so I'm in a space now, 41 years old. I'm in a space where I am comfortable in my own skin. I like who I am becoming, not a finished product, but I like personally who I'm becoming, what I see the Lord doing in my own life, as a man, as a preacher, as a husband, as a father, as a leader, all of that language. I'm comfortable. Like I don't feel like I'm competing anymore. I know what I can do, and I'm trying to get better at what I do. The Lord is showing me new things that I didn't know I could do. And like you talk about preaching preparation, it's the depth now, the content, the substance that I see. And that's because he's doing more with me now. And I'm grateful for that. And it took life and correction from God, as you mentioned, and experience. And so I have not arrived. Not that I have already attained, but I see where I like where I am right now. I'm not chasing anything, just enjoying where I am.
And that is a good place to be. And all of us, whether we're preachers or not, everybody goes through that searching. And God cannot maximize the potential that's in you until you get to the point you're at now.
Yes, sir.
Prior to this point, you were searching to become something God never intended you to be, because that's what you wanted to be, and that's not God's plan. You were tempted by things because you didn't know who you were. You thought those things could add some validation to you.
Yes.
Now all that temptation is gone.
Yeah.
And so now that God has your attention,
yeah,
and your focus in the right place, he said, come on now, let me help you become all that I have for you. And so when you find yourself in this space that you're in, you're going to see God do some miraculous things, because he had to wait on you to get there. And now that you're there, brother, just stay humble now, because he's gonna open some doors and elevate you in some places that's going to blow your mind. And so just stay humble. And
so,
him make
sisters and brothers, do y'all see how these two men just checked me in front of the whole world? That's the accountability that I live under. They know I'm open to it. They know I take it, and they whoop me a lot worse when we're not on screen together. But that is what I'm so grateful for in this season. And what you talked about with certain things that we're chasing. I can pinpoint a time in my ministry where I was chasing other preachers, like national names, and I was chasing them, wanting to be around them. And, to be fair to myself, some of them I just admired and wanted to glean from their gifts, But once you get in company with them and you realize that they don't value you, they don't seek a relationship with you, and they know you chasing them. And so they kind of almost, dangle it in front of your face, almost just their endorsement or their opportunity to be around them. And once I realized that was what was happening, I quickly, got out of that. I don't need to be in anybody's particular group, or because, we got preacher connections now, and certain ones are in certain groups and cliques with one another, and they preach each other, and they, whatever. But I can pinpoint the time when I was doing that, because I felt like if I could get validated by this one, if I could get in the company of this one, that would open doors for me. And what I've learned now is that God can open whatever doors he wants open, because every door you don't want to walk in.
Let me share just this little bit with you.
Mm-hmm.
I had a good friend of mine who was a pastor still. He asked me after we had attended a National Baptist Convention, and the preacher that was running for president at that time, we supported, and he was elected. And this preacher asked me, have you heard from President so-and-so since they were elected? And I said, no. I said, but I heard from God this morning. And that meant more to me than hearing from the president.
Yeah.
If I ever go a day and I don't hear from God, it bothers me. But if I don't hear from famous preachers, famous pastors, mayors, governors, it's not that important to me. As long as I can hear from God. Because that's the person that gave me my assignment. That's the person who's going to grade my paper. That's the person whose grace I'm dependent upon for me to get a passing grade. Notice I didn't say earn, but get a passing grade.
Yeah.
And it is by the grace of God that we are what we are.
Yeah.
And because God has plans for our lives. And we have to make sure that we are in the will of God and walking in his way and in his will.
Yeah. And I'll have to be transparent. One of the issues that I have is that I've just never been one who's gonna kiss up to anybody. I'm not gonna get chapped lips trying to go to the top. So when I encountered those preachers, and I ran into that spirit you're talking about, I just dropped it. That's what I was doing. Hey, I'm Daniel Simmons, and I'm growing, and I've been observing your ministry. I'd like to bring some of my people, and some of them were open, and some of them were arrogant and said, "Oh no," and so I just that was it. I invited some to preach. I could call this is Pastor Simmons. I'd like to speak to Pastor Simmons, Pastor so and so about coming to preach. Okay, then I call him up. Oh no, you can't talk to him, and you fill out this form. And I said, please, that's okay. Forget that.
Yeah.
I'm not asking anybody to come preach for me. They won't talk to me. They want to know what my budget is. They want to know how many members I got, how many people gonna be in attendance. I mean, God didn't call you to preach based on a budget and attendance, and so I just dumped them. And then what ended up happening, they started calling me. They talked to somebody who preached for me, or they saw something. Now you calling me, and I'm praying that God don't let me stay in that place on me, because I'm tempted to say, let me send you a form to fill out.
If you're gonna be petty about it, absolutely.
Yeah. So God delivered me from that. I'll fool with it.
And it's a testament to who the both of you are, because I've witnessed it literally all my life. Growing up in New Jersey, we had 1,000 members. We fellowshiped with Round the Corner Baptist Church, up the road AME Church, Hole in the Wall Pentecostal Ministries Incorporated, and every time you gave it your best as if you were preaching the National Baptist Convention. You brought more people than some of those churches had. Then I watched Mount Zion and how y'all flow. You've gone to be with congregations that are not half your size. You have preached revivals for preachers who are not nationally known. And I think I might have told y'all this story. I may have even told it on air one time. And I can't speak specifically about the occasion, because there may be some folk that were there and they'll know what I'm talking about. But I met a preacher one day, a pastor, nationally known pastor, and we were both on the same panel together, presenting at a particular event in a particular state for a particular convention. And so
I know exactly what you're talking about.
I do too.
And so I'm talking with him, right? And we talk afterwards. We exchange numbers, and he's in a particular city. And he says, so where you preaching? I said, man, I'm about to be in Albany, Georgia, 2 straight weeks. I got Mount Pilgrim and then Mount Zion right behind it. Then I'm going to be in a place called Camilla, Georgia. And then I'm going to be such and such. He said, man, I don't go to them little places no more. They can't afford me. I don't even waste my time going to them places. And immediately I got insecure. You know, this is some years ago, so I still ain't comfortable in my own skin yet. But that level of arrogance, to be able to say certain places you just ain't gonna go to because of who you think that you are. I vowed, based on y'all's example, never to be that way, you know. I go everywhere that I am invited. The one of the best revivals I do every year, back when we was doing revivals, is in Vidalia, Georgia, for Reverend J.J. Walker, another son of Antioch. And there may have been 7 people in there every night. Drove all the way to Vidalia, stayed in the Days Inn, ate at Shoney's every day. But that is one of the best experience. And they fed me quail on the last night of revival. You know what I'm saying? I might have that has been one of the more memorable experiences for me. Because that spirit I ran into with that other brother, I never want to be that.
God will open doors and he will make ways. And you have to show yourself faithful. You might go to one church and they can't afford to pay you but $1. And somewhere down the road, God will make it up, by blessing you to go somewhere where they can pay you $2.
Yeah.
But don't ever accept or turn down engagements because of the money.
That's right.
My daddy said, and I try to train my deacons and trustees that way. My daddy said a good deacon a good preacher won't take it all, and a good deacon won't keep it all. And I try to train my deacons that way. I'm not trying to take it all, but you shouldn't be trying to keep it all.
Yeah.
A laborer is worthy of his hire. Muzzle not the ox that treadeth the corn.
Yes.
So if a preacher work, he deserved to eat, from the bread.
Yes.
And but never determine how much you put in it about what finances you get out of it.
Absolutely.
Because you have a greater reward, and that's what you were working for.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Anything on that, Dr. Daniel?
No, I want to talk about something else for a minute.
Sure.
And this would be advice to you, and I take it for myself, but to other preachers who will listen, even members, so that you will know how to support your pastor. I think one of the paradigm shifts that has to happen in the preaching community now, sooner than it used to, and I say sooner because at some point in your pastorate you reach this point where you understand your role, and that is, as pastors, we've got to see ourselves as leaders. And the preaching is a part of our leadership. And the preaching is not the end all. Because there are some preachers who think that it's all about the preaching. And again, I don't want to minimize the preaching. Now, it is. But preaching is a tool you use as a part of your leadership. And so our job now, more than ever, is to lead the congregation. Shepherds lead. You drive cattle, but you lead sheep. Mm. And so how do you lead the church? And part of that leadership means, according to Ephesians 4:12, equipping the saints. We've got to start empowering more of our members to do the work of ministry, and we do less of the work of ministry and empower them to do it. We work on the church, and they work in the church. And as we empower members, you will see more growth in the church in every measurable way. And but our mindset has to be changed. I am the leader. How am I empowering people? What kind of vision am I casting? Yeah. What kind of relationships am I developing so that I can bring the resources so that the people will have what they need? And all of those leadership things. What kind of influence am I building? Mm-hmm. And do I understand that leadership is different based on the number of years the person has been in the church and my connection to them? And so there's some I lead one way and some I lead another way. It's based on what that leadership relationship is. And I can go on and on, but just knowing that we are leaders and begin to think and act like a leader.
Which then leads to our final point of discussion for the night, which is integrity. Uncle, I don't know if you got the same call I got this one particular night, but Daddy called me one night some years ago, and he real spiritual. So he get in these modes sometime where he is just on the frequency with the Holy Spirit, and him and the Lord seeing eye to eye. And he called me one night and said, son, the Lord told me to tell you this, and I'm gonna hang up. He said, I want you and me and Daniel to be the best pastors, husbands, and fathers that God ever made. Now at this point, I'm shook because I'm like, well, now, are you dying? Is something wrong? Like, are you getting ready, to leave us and you just ain't telling me? He said, no, ain't nothing wrong. But the Lord told me to tell you that I want you, me, and Daniel to be the best fathers, husbands, and pastors that God ever made. And he hung up. That's the integrity conversation that I wanted to have with us before we get off of this line. We will all struggle as humans, with various whatever. But to have that said to me in that space was so empowering. It was inspiring, because for a man to say that to another man, for a father to say it to his son, for another pastor to say it to another pastor, that's the priority. That integrity is more important than anything else. It blew my mind then, and it fills me up even now as I think about it. What was going on in your heart at the time when you made that call? If you can remember it, because you was in the third heaven, so you may not remember it.
I remember the call vividly, and I still remember the level of the anointing at the time that I did it.
Yeah.
Because I kept reiterating in my mind, the same works that I do, ye shall do, and greater works than these shall ye do. That meant that the Lord expected us to do what he did and greater than what he did. In the Old Testament, it says God is light. In the New Testament, it says Jesus is light. Yeah. And then later on, he says, ye are the light of the world. So that means that if God is light, Jesus is light, and we are light, then we are what God and Jesus is.
Yeah. I got you.
And so, if that's the case, we've got to be the best husband. Because if God had a wife, and he does, the church, he's the best husband the church could have. Mm-hmm. If God is a father, and he's Jesus' father, he's our father. Okay, if God is a shepherd, he is, because we are under shepherds.
Yeah.
And he's the best. So if we're going to be what God and Jesus are, or he is, we've got to be the best.
Yeah. That's good stuff.
And so that's where I was, and that's why, integrity is important. You can't have step. Gotta be it. Gotta be the best. And guess what? We have an opportunity to be that, because we woke up this morning. Yeah. As long as we're waking up, we got an opportunity.
Yeah.
Every time you lay down and wake up, you have that same opportunity.
Yeah.
And we're smarter than we used to be.
Yeah.
So we know how.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Yeah. And I got a similar call, and I concur with that. And I have shared publicly with the congregation, with my family and friends, that as I look toward the end of my life, I want this to be the order. That the people who think the most of the man laying in front of them, who says that he's contributed the most of their lives and lived before them a life of integrity, is family. I want my children to honestly be able to say that about me, and Diane and the family, and then the church and the community. But it starts with the father, the husband, and all of that. And so I want to be that.
Yeah.
And as Perry said, we can. God gives us the opportunity to do that. And let me tell you something else.
Mm-hmm.
It makes us and the ministry we lead attractive. You'll be surprised at the number of people who will attach themselves to the ministry, not because of your preaching, but they see how you treat your family. They see how you treat yourself. They see how you treat other people around you.
Mm-hmm.
And that is attractive. That is appealing. And so, yeah, we do that.
Y'all, this has been Man Cave Monday. And these are two very, very special men to me. And any chance I get to talk with them, and certainly to have them share in some space or another, it's always a privilege. I hope that you have enjoyed this experience. I hope that you will share it with somebody. Is there anything in closing that you all would like to offer before we get off?
Let me say to you and to every young pastor who might be listening, you remember that when Lazarus and the rich man died, and you know the story, Lazarus went to Abraham's bosom, the rich man, and went to hell, and in hell he lifted up his eyes. The rich man said something. He made a request of the Lord, you know, to let Lazarus go back and warn his brothers not to come to this place. The Lord said to him, they had Moses, they had Elijah, they had the prophets, and they didn't hear them, so they wouldn't hear anybody who came back from the dead.
Yeah.
To you and to all young pastors, God has given you the Perry Simmons, the Daniel Simmons, the Cameron Alexander, the Holmes, all of those. Make sure that you hear them, because he's not going to send anybody from heaven or hell. He has given you us.
Amen. Doc?
My closing would be just to follow up on something that you said. You referenced 4 years ago. At some point, you have to accept the forgiveness that God has given you and turn the page.
Yes.
And so now the focus is on this new direction. And not the past. Forgetting those things which are behind. And straining and reaching forward to those things which are before. Paul let go of the way he treated the church. And he moved forward. And so that's what I want to say to you.
Amen. And thank you for that. Thank you for that. I think Daddy tired of us. He done got up.
No, man. I don't want it to die.
Well, good thing we getting ready to get off right now. But ladies and gentlemen, brothers and sisters, this has been another edition of Man Cave Monday. This is Dr. Perry Simmons Jr. This is Reverend Dr. Daniel Simmons. Gentlemen, thank y'all so much for this time. I honor you. I appreciate you. And I know that those who watched tonight certainly appreciate it as well. Once again, y'all, we'll see you next week with another guest, same time, same space right here. Don't forget to get on the YouTube presence as well, so that we can try and build that and put out more inspirational content as well. You guys have been awesome. Thank you again. We'll see you real soon.
All right. Bless you.